On the 19th of September 1940, in occupied Warsaw, a man made a decision that defied all human logic and survival instinct. While thousands desperately tried to escape the Nazi terror sweeping through Poland, 39-year-old cavalry officer Witold Pilecki deliberately walked into a German street roundup. He carried false identity papers. He had no intention of escaping. His mission was the opposite: to get captured, to be sent to a place of unimaginable horror, to voluntarily enter what would become history's most infamous death camp. What you are about to learn about this man will shake everything you thought you knew about courage, sacrifice, and the limits of human endurance. Witold Pilecki was born on the 13th of May, 1901, in the Russian Empire, in what is now Belarus. He grew up in a patriotic Polish family that valued honor, duty, and sacrifice above all else. As a young man, he fought for Polish independence against the Bolsheviks in 1920. He was a cavalry officer, a farmer, a family man with 2 children. By all accounts, he had every reason to hide, to protect himself and his family when the Nazis invaded Poland in September 1939. But Pilecki was not a man who could hide while his country burned. Within weeks of the invasion, he co-founded one of the first Polish resistance organizations, the Secret Polish Army. They gathered intelligence, sabotaged German operations, prepared for eventual uprising. But in 1940, the resistance learned something disturbing. The Germans were building a massive concentration camp near the town of Auschwitz, which the Germans called Auschwitz. Rumors filtered out: brutal conditions, mass deaths, systematic murder. But details were scarce. The Nazis kept the camp isolated, surrounded by secrecy. The Polish resistance needed to know what was really happening inside. They needed detailed intelligence, numbers, methods, guard routines, possibilities for resistance or escape. Someone needed to get inside and report back. When Pilecki's commanders discussed this impossible mission, he volunteered immediately. Not because he was ordered, not because he had no other choice. He volunteered because he believed it was necessary, and he believed he could survive long enough to gather the intelligence Poland needed. The plan was insane. Pilecki would use false papers under the name Tomasz Serafiński. He would deliberately get caught in a German street roundup. The Germans were regularly sweeping Warsaw's streets, grabbing random men to send to labor camps. Most Poles desperately avoided these lapankas, hiding in apartments, fleeing down alleys. Pilecki would walk directly into one. On that September morning, he positioned himself on a Warsaw street where German troops were conducting a roundup. He made no attempt to escape. He was seized along with roughly 2,000 other men. They were held in a cavalry barracks for 2 days without food or water. Then they were crammed into cattle cars, 150 men per car, standing room only. The journey to Auschwitz took nearly 2 days. Men urinated and defecated where they stood. Some died during transport. When the train arrived at Auschwitz on the 22nd of September, 1940, the prisoners were beaten off the cars with rifle butts and clubs. SS guards screamed orders, dogs barked, men fell and were trampled. This was Pilecki's introduction to hell on earth, but he had chosen to be here. He was assigned prisoner number 4859. What Pilecki found in Auschwitz exceeded even the darkest rumors. This was not merely a labor camp. This was a factory of death, a systematic operation designed to break men's bodies and spirits before killing them. The initial processing was designed to strip away every shred of human dignity. Prisoners were forced to strip naked in the cold. Their heads were shaved. They were beaten for no reason, kicked, struck with clubs. Their clothes were taken and replaced with thin striped uniforms that provided no warmth. They were given wooden clogs that tore their feet bloody. The daily routine was designed to kill. Wake up at 4 in the morning. Stand for hours in the bitter cold for roll call, sometimes until noon if someone was missing. Work details, doing brutal physical labor, hauling rocks, building structures, draining swamps for 12 to 14 hours. Food was watery soup and a piece of bread, barely enough to sustain life. Prisoners lost weight rapidly. Within weeks, healthy men looked like walking skeletons. But the physical suffering was only part of it. The psychological torture was calculated and relentless. Guards would beat prisoners to death for entertainment. Men were forced to watch their friends executed for trivial infractions. The camp orchestra played cheerful music while prisoners were hanged. The SS conducted medical experiments on living prisoners without anesthesia. People simply disappeared, taken to the execution wall or the gas chambers that would soon be built. The average life expectancy for a prisoner in Auschwitz in 1940 was 3 months. Most men who arrived with Pilecki were dead within weeks. But Pilecki had a mission, and that mission kept him alive when others gave up. He was not here merely to survive. He was here to document, to organize, to resist. Within months of arriving, Pilecki began organizing resistance within the camp. This seems impossible. How could starving, beaten, constantly watched prisoners organize anything? But Pilecki was a natural leader, with military training and unbreakable will. He started carefully, identifying trustworthy men, mostly fellow Polish political prisoners who still had fight left in them. He formed an organization called Związek Organizacji Wojskowej, or ZOW, the Union of Military Organizations. Later it was incorporated into the larger Armia Krajowa, the Home Army. Cell by cell, contact by contact, Pilecki built a secret network inside the camp. At its height, his organization included nearly 1,000 members, distributed throughout the camp's various sections. What did this resistance do? They could not stage an armed uprising. They had no weapons, no strength, no chance against machine guns and guard towers. But they did what they could. They distributed extra food to the weakest prisoners, trying to keep them alive. They provided medicine stolen from the camp hospital. They passed information and warnings about SS plans. They maintained morale, reminding men they were still human, still soldiers, still fighting, even in this place. Most importantly, they gathered intelligence. Pilecki documented everything: the number of prisoners, the death rates, the methods of killing, the expansion of the camp, the construction of the gas chambers and crematoria in 1942. He recorded the arrival of Jewish transports and the beginning of the industrial-scale genocide. He witnessed the evolution of Auschwitz from a concentration camp for political prisoners into the central killing facility of the Holocaust. Getting this information out was extraordinarily difficult. Pilecki had to find prisoners who were being released or transferred, hide messages in their clothing or belongings, give them contacts outside the camp who could relay the information to the resistance. It required perfect timing, absolute trust, and incredible courage. If the SS discovered these messages, everyone involved would be tortured and executed. But Pilecki succeeded. His reports reached the Polish resistance in Warsaw, then were forwarded to the Polish government in exile in London, then shared with British intelligence and eventually the Americans. These reports contained the first comprehensive, detailed accounts of what was happening in Auschwitz. Pilecki described the gas chambers, the crematoria, the systematic murder of Jews transported from across Europe. He estimated the death toll at hundreds of thousands, then over 1 million. And here is the tragic part. Nobody believed him. The reports seemed too extreme, too horrific to be true. How could civilized Germans, heirs to Goethe and Beethoven, systematically murder millions? Western intelligence officials dismissed the reports as Polish exaggeration or resistance propaganda. They filed the documents away. They did nothing. Pilecki's reports reached London by early 1941, describing mass killings. More detailed reports came in 1942, describing the gas chambers and industrial genocide. The Allies had the information. They could have bombed the railway lines leading to Auschwitz. They could have bombed the gas chambers themselves. They chose not to, claiming such operations were not militarily feasible, that resources must focus on winning the war. Thousands continued to die daily while Pilecki's intelligence reports gathered dust in Allied offices. Inside Auschwitz, Pilecki continued his work. He survived impossible odds. He contracted typhus twice and survived. He was beaten countless times. He watched friends die, saw horrors that would drive most men insane. In 1942, he witnessed the arrival of the first Jewish transports for immediate gassing. He saw families separated, children torn from mothers, elderly and sick selected for death within hours of arrival. He documented it all. By early 1943, Pilecki had been in Auschwitz for nearly 3 years, an eternity in camp terms. Few prisoners lasted even 6 months. But he realized his mission was reaching a dead end. His reports were not generating action from the Allies. His organization inside the camp, while impressive, could not stop the killing. He began to believe the only solution was a military attack from outside. Pilecki developed a plan for the Home Army to attack Auschwitz from outside, while the prisoners revolted from within. His organization had grown strong enough to seize control of parts of the camp if they had outside help. But to coordinate this, Pilecki needed to escape and meet with resistance commanders face to face. He needed to convince them that an attack was feasible, that it could save lives, that it must be attempted. Escaping Auschwitz was considered nearly impossible. The camp was surrounded by multiple fences, watchtowers with machine guns, searchlights, patrols. Prisoners who were caught attempting escape were tortured and executed publicly as warnings. Their barracks mates were often executed as well, collective punishment to discourage escape attempts. But Pilecki was determined. On the night of the 26th to 27th of April, 1943, Pilecki and 2 other prisoners, Jan Redze and Edward Cieselski, executed their escape plan. They were working at a bakery outside the main camp perimeter. They overpowered a guard, stole his weapons and documents, cut the telephone wires, and ran into the night. German troops pursued with dogs. Search parties scoured the area. But Pilecki and his companions knew the terrain, moved fast, and had help from Polish civilians who gave them shelter. After several days of hiding and traveling, Pilecki reached Warsaw and contacted the Home Army Command. He submitted a comprehensive report, over 100 pages, describing everything he had seen and organized in Auschwitz. He urged immediate military action to liberate the camp. He argued that with proper planning, a joint attack by the Home Army and Allied bombers could destroy the gas chambers and free the prisoners. The Home Army commanders refused. They said they lacked the resources for such an operation. They were preparing for a general uprising against the Germans in Warsaw itself. The operation that would become the tragic Warsaw Uprising of 1944. They could not spare troops or weapons for an attack on Auschwitz, hundreds of kilometers away. They thanked Pilecki for his intelligence but rejected his operational proposal. Pilecki was devastated, but continued fighting. He joined the Home Army in Warsaw, fought in the Warsaw Uprising from August to October 1944. The uprising was crushed. Over 200,000 civilians died. The Germans systematically destroyed Warsaw, burning it block by block. Pilecki survived and was taken prisoner of war, sent to a German POW camp. He was liberated by American forces in May 1945. The war was over. Pilecki had survived Auschwitz, survived the Warsaw Uprising, survived the POW camp. He had accomplished his impossible mission, gathered intelligence that documented one of history's greatest crimes. He was a hero, a man whose courage exceeded comprehension. Surely now he would receive recognition, rest, peace. But this is where Pilecki's story becomes truly tragic, where heroism meets political reality and shows how cruel history can be to its greatest figures. Poland in 1945 was not free. The Nazis were gone, but the Soviets had arrived. Stalin installed a communist puppet government in Warsaw. The legitimate Polish government in exile, which Pilecki had served, was ignored by the Allies and betrayed at Yalta. Poland exchanged one totalitarian occupier for another. Pilecki could not accept this. He had not spent 3 years in Auschwitz, fought against the Nazis, seen his friends die, only to see his country enslaved by another dictatorship. He remained loyal to the legal Polish government in exile. He stayed in Poland, gathering intelligence on Soviet and communist activities, documenting NKVD operations, reporting back to London. He was doing exactly what he had done in Auschwitz, operating undercover in enemy territory, documenting crimes, reporting to legitimate authorities. But now the enemy was not the Nazis. It was the Soviets and their Polish communist collaborators. And they were hunting for people exactly like him. Home Army veterans, patriots loyal to the government in exile, potential resistance leaders. On the 8th of May 1947, Pilecki was arrested by the communist secret police. They knew exactly who he was, a Home Army officer, an intelligence agent for the exile government, a potential rallying point for anti-communist resistance. They could not allow such a man to remain free. What followed was a grotesque parody of justice. Pilecki was imprisoned in the same Mokotów prison in Warsaw, where the Nazis had held political prisoners during occupation. He was interrogated, tortured, beaten. They wanted him to confess to being a spy for Western powers, to denounce the Home Army as fascists and terrorists, to provide names of other resistance members. Pilecki endured torture in Auschwitz. He endured it again from the communists. His interrogators were Polish, his own countrymen, following Soviet NKVD methods. They used sleep deprivation, beatings, psychological torture. But Pilecki revealed nothing that would endanger others. He admitted working for the government in exile, which he considered the only legitimate Polish government. He refused to call himself a traitor or criminal. The show trial began on the 3rd of March, 1948. The charges were absurd: espionage for foreign powers, illegal border crossing, possession of weapons, attempting to overthrow the legal government. The verdict was predetermined. Pilecki defended himself with dignity, refusing to accept the legitimacy of the court or the communist government. He said he had always served Poland, that his loyalty was to the nation, not to those who served foreign masters. On the 15th of March, 1948, the court sentenced Witold Pilecki to death. On the 25th of May, 1948, he was executed with a single shot to the back of the head in the basement of Mokotów prison. He was 47 years old. His body was dumped in an unmarked mass grave. Its location remains unknown to this day. Before execution, Pilecki wrote final letters to his wife and children. He told them he had done his duty, served his country, had no regrets. He asked them to be strong, to remember him, to live with dignity. These letters were confiscated by the secret police and hidden in archives for decades. His family did not receive them until after communism fell. After Pilecki's execution, the communist government did everything possible to erase his memory. His name was forbidden. His service records were destroyed. His family was harassed and watched. Anyone who spoke about him risked arrest. His incredible story, the voluntary infiltration of Auschwitz, the resistance organization, the intelligence reports, the escape, the continued fight for Poland, was buried and forgotten. For over 40 years, Pilecki was erased from history. While the world remembered other heroes of World War II, this man who voluntarily entered hell and documented the Holocaust remained unknown. The communists portrayed the Home Army as fascist collaborators, traitors who fought against the people. They created a false history where only communist partisans were the real resistance, where patriotic officers like Pilecki were villains. Only after the fall of communism in 1989 did Poland begin to rediscover Witold Pilecki. Archives opened. Documents emerged. Survivors told stories. Historians began piecing together his incredible biography. In 1990, he was officially rehabilitated. The 1948 conviction was declared invalid. He was posthumously promoted to colonel. In 2008, he received Poland's highest military decoration, the Order of the White Eagle. But why does this story matter today? Because it reveals something profound about courage, about sacrifice, about how history treats its heroes. Consider what Pilecki did. He volunteered to be imprisoned in Auschwitz, not accidentally captured, not forced. He deliberately walked into the Nazi roundup, knowing where he would be sent. Imagine making that choice. Imagine having a family, children, a life, and choosing to leave it all to enter a place where most prisoners died within months. He spent 2 years and 7 months in Auschwitz. He witnessed genocide. He survived typhus, starvation, beatings, psychological torture. He organized resistance in conditions where organizing anything seemed impossible. He documented the Holocaust in real time and smuggled that information to the outside world. He escaped when escape seemed impossible. He continued fighting in the Warsaw Uprising. And then, after surviving all that, after accomplishing his mission, he was arrested by his own countrymen, tortured by fellow Poles, executed by a Polish court, and erased from Polish history for 40 years. This is the ultimate betrayal. Not by enemies. He expected nothing from Nazis or communists, but by his own country, by the system that emerged after the war, by the political calculations that decided his story was inconvenient, dangerous, better forgotten. Pilecki's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. What does it mean to be heroic if your heroism is erased? What does sacrifice mean if the cause you sacrifice for ultimately fails? Poland was not free after the war. The Soviet occupation lasted until 1989. Did Pilecki's sacrifice mean anything if Poland remained enslaved for 45 years after his death? But these are the wrong questions. Pilecki did not fight for abstract concepts or guaranteed outcomes. He fought because fighting was the right thing to do. He entered Auschwitz because someone needed to document the truth. He joined the Warsaw Uprising because his city was fighting for freedom. He gathered intelligence on the communists because totalitarianism was wrong, whether Nazi or Soviet. He lived by a code of honor that many people today find almost incomprehensible. Duty, loyalty, sacrifice. These were not just words to him. They were principles worth dying for. And he was willing to die twice. Once in Auschwitz if necessary, and again facing communist executioners. His story is a reminder that some people in history shine so brightly that no amount of political suppression can permanently extinguish them. The communists tried to erase Pilecki. They executed him, hid his body, destroyed his records, forbade his name. They succeeded for 40 years, but truth is stubborn. Eventually the archives opened, the survivors spoke, the story emerged. Today, Witold Pilecki is recognized as one of the greatest heroes of World War II. His report, written after escaping Auschwitz, is considered one of the most important Holocaust documents. Historians acknowledge he provided the first comprehensive intelligence about what was happening in the camp. The Polish people honor him as a symbol of patriotism and resistance. Streets and schools bear his name. His biography has been translated into multiple languages. But his story remains less known internationally than it should be. Ask random people in America or Britain about World War II heroes, and they will mention Churchill, Eisenhower, Patton, maybe some resistance fighters. Few know about the Polish cavalry officer who voluntarily entered Auschwitz. Perhaps this is because his story is too extreme, too heroic, almost unbelievable. We are accustomed to heroes who fight against oppression from relatively safe positions. We admire leaders who rally nations, generals who plan campaigns, soldiers who fight battles. But Pilecki did something different. He voluntarily surrendered his freedom, entered the worst place on earth, and documented humanity's darkest hour from inside hell itself. And then, having survived that, he refused to compromise with the next tyranny. He could have stayed silent, kept his head down, lived quietly in communist Poland. Many others did, but Pilecki's conscience would not allow it. He continued fighting because fighting totalitarianism was right, regardless of consequences. This is what makes his story both inspiring and tragic. He was executed by the very country he tried to save. He died in the basement of a prison, shot like a criminal, buried in an unmarked grave. For 4 decades, his name was forbidden, his story suppressed, his sacrifice forgotten. But the deepest truth is this: Pilecki won. Not immediately, not obviously, but ultimately. The Third Reich fell. The Soviet Union collapsed. Communist Poland is gone. But Pilecki's story lives. His reports document what happened. His example inspires. His name is honored. He proved that even in the darkest places, resistance is possible. That even in Auschwitz, human dignity can survive. That courage is not about being fearless. He must have been terrified countless times. But about acting despite fear. That sacrifice is meaningful, even if the immediate outcome is defeat, because moral victories transcend political ones. Today, when we face moral choices, when we must decide whether to speak up or stay silent, to resist or comply, to risk something for principle or play it safe, we can think of Witold Pilecki. We can remember that a man once voluntarily entered hell because it was necessary, that he survived by strength of will, that he continued fighting until the end, that he died with dignity, that truth eventually prevailed. His story is uncomfortable because it sets an impossible standard. None of us will likely face choices as stark as Pilecki's. But that is precisely why his story matters. If he could endure Auschwitz voluntarily, surely we can endure lesser discomforts for what is right. If he could resist totalitarianism knowing it meant death, surely we can resist smaller injustices. If he could maintain his principles through torture and execution, surely we can maintain ours through lesser pressures. Witold Pilecki's story is a testament to the indomitable human spirit, to the power of individual conscience, to the ultimate triumph of truth over lies. He entered hell voluntarily and emerged to tell the truth. He was killed for that truth, but the truth survived. In the end, that is all that matters. Truth survives. Heroes are remembered. Tyrannies fall. And somewhere, in an unmarked grave in Warsaw, lies the body of one of history's bravest men, a man who chose to enter Auschwitz, who survived it, who continued fighting, who died unbroken, and whose story finally received the recognition it always deserved.